Welcome back, U.S. history students. I hope everyone is doing well today. We're going to be continuing our coverage of World War II and the United States' role within this war. Um, Yesterday, we talked about the initial foreign policy the United States took at the outbreak, but how they still are connected to this war. We covered the Lend-Lease Act. And a lot of you guys were able to kind of come to the conclusion that even though the U.S. claimed neutrality, their economic activities might have said otherwise. Okay, so for today, our aim is how can we summarize the impact of the attack on Pearl Harbor in the short term and long term. Okay, so our key idea today is we're going to be looking into the attack on Pearl Harbor, and we're trying to see what's that short term, almost immediate impact, but also how does this have a long term impact on American citizens as well. Okay, so shifting down to our do now, you're trying to define what foreign policy is. All right, this is a review question. We've talked about foreign policy throughout the year, so just try to give a brief definition of what foreign policy is, and then what type of foreign policy does the U.S. have at outbreak of World War II. So pause the video, come up with those ideas, put them into your do now on your handout. Okay, so coming back together, we're going to hit our fast facts for today. And the first fast fact gives you an answer for part of your do now. All right, so at the outbreak of World War II, the U.S. declared neutrality. Okay, the U.S. Made it clear that they wanted to be neutral. All right, they see this as a European war. There's disillusionment from how World War I played out and how the world is kind of entering into this high level of violence, carnage, and death very quickly after World War I. So the U.S. remains neutral. They do take part, though, in what's known as the Lend-Lease program. Okay, allows the U.S. to trade with nations at war, and this greatly assisted the American economy. All right, as we talked about yesterday, the war really helps end the Great Depression. Okay, the American economy gets a jolt from this wartime business. Manufacturing picks up, hiring picks up, you see unemployment drop, and World War II really drags the U.S. out of the Great Depression. One of the problems you see with the Lend-Lease program, though, is that although the U.S. promised to trade with all nations, right, they're neutral. They're supposed to not take a side. The majority of their trade was done with the Allies. So this Lend-Lease program is providing resources, weapons to the nations at war. If the U.S. is truly neutral, they should be trading with both sides. But what you see is the U.S. is doing most of their trading with Britain, France, the Soviet Union, also known as the Allies. The Axis powers, all right, Italy, Germany, are not really fans of this trade. They feel it's an unfair advantage for the Allies. Once Japan joins, they also feel like it's an unfair advantage for the Allies. And we see that in an attempt to pull the U.S. into World War II, Japan bombs an American Navy base in Hawaii, which is known as Pearl Harbor. And this attack on America pulls the U.S. into World War II. So similar to what we saw in World War I, that unrestricted submarine warfare, the U-boats, the Germans continually sinking commercial ships, all right, passenger ships. American lives are being lost. Eventually, the U.S. enters the war to protect democracy worldwide. Very similar story in World War II. All right, an attack on the nation, an attack on the military base in Pearl Harbor leads to the U.S. entrance into. All right, one thing that's missing is this attack occurs in 1941. Okay, so war breaks out in Europe, 1939. Only 2 years into the war, now the U.S. has entered on the side of the Allies. Okay, and we see there's lingering effects to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay, and one of those lingering effects is once the US is in the war, we see FDR create an executive order that required Japanese Americans to be placed in prison camps. So, what you see is the President of the United States creates an executive order that forces Japanese Americans to be pulled from their homes and placed in prison camps, also known as internment camps. Okay. And this is challenged in the Supreme Court. All right, a case known as Korematsu versus U.S. Korematsu is an American citizen. He is forced to go to these internment camps, and he challenges and says his rights are being violated. And this case is argued all the way up to the Supreme Court. Okay, so just some images before we get moving into the activity. Okay, um, we see some newspaper headlines from the attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay, we see the memorial that's currently at Pearl Harbor. Okay, and you can see the level of destruction. There's a lot of casualties as a result of this, and this is one of the more kind of life altering events in American history. So, what you guys are going to be doing today, I'll shift to the document. Okay, the first thing that you're going to be doing is using this text to study the American response to the attacks on Pearl Harbor. Okay, the speech is given by FDR, and it's the day after the attacks on Pearl Harbor, and it's one of the more famous presidential speeches ever given. This line, the first line, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. It is one of the more famous presidential lines we've seen in American history. Okay, so you're going to use this text to understand what is Roosevelt going to do in the wake of this attack. Okay, you have some questions below. Remember, read the question, turn it into a sentence starter, and then go back to the text. Okay, once you conclude with your reading, all right, you're going to scroll down and you're going to be using a timeline. Okay, and this timeline, what this timeline does is it tries to track the kind of story of Japanese Americans and their treatment throughout U.S. history. Okay, you can see it goes all the way back to 1885, and it goes all the way to 1988. So this covers almost about 100 years. Okay, right in the middle, you start to see the events of World War II coming into effect. But we're trying to see what's life like for Japanese Americans before World War II and what's life like for Japanese Americans after World War II. Okay, to try to understand is this treatment out of the ordinary, or has this group kind of continually been marginalized in U.S. history leading up to the bombing of Pearl Harbor as well? Okay, so you have some analysis questions below. If I can scroll there. Okay, some analysis questions below. Same strategies as before. Turn the questions into sentence starters, pull out relevant information, and explain your ideas. Okay, there needs to be details. There needs to be analysis. Okay, these should not just be one sentence responses. Okay, if you have any questions or concerns, let me know. Look forward to seeing you guys soon.